maybe on NFL Draft Day, we could drag this man out to our set and be a part of this year's draft party. Mr. John McMullen on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Johnny Mac, welcome back. How are you, pal?
Doing well. Rumor has I will be there before I get to the NovaCare complex, but we'll work all that out.
Yeah, the NovaCare complex, I heard this year, what are they doing, tickets at Lincoln Financial Field?
Yeah, they always do a party for the fans at Lincoln Financial Field, but us media types, we congregate at the NovaCare complex.
Yes, and, the draft's still, about a month or so away, less than a month now. We're coming down the stretch for that. We got plenty to dive into on that draft. The Eagles, with this draft, it's hard to kind of put a finger on where they might go now. This is your classic Howie Roseman best player available, it feels like.
Yeah, they've done a lot in free agency, and that's kind of the goal because you don't want to be in a position where you have to reach for a certain position. And I think Howie has done a pretty good job of clearing up the obvious needs with at least some help at those particular positions. Running back with Jordan Howard, defensive tackle with Malik Jackson, outside receiver with Deshaun Jackson. And on and on. So he's patched most of the obvious holes, and that's a good position to be in because then you can just sort of let the board come to you. And if there's a player that drops that you really like, you don't have to be concerned about maybe reaching for a different position with a lesser player.
Yeah.
And that's always good.
Real quick on that, they a couple of years ago in the second round, they took Sidney Jones, and because that was a value type of pick, in this particular situation, if they're making a value pick, if you're saying, okay, there's a player and he's dropping, is there a position where a value pick makes sense? Because I'm looking around and I'm thinking. Go ahead.
I think there's a number of positions. I still think defensive tackle is a logical position. I think offensive line is logical for two reasons. One, the Eagles believe that's where you build your team. So even though you say, well, that's the strengths of the football team, and it is, but you also have to start talking about heir apparents for Jason Peters on the offensive side of the ball. Jason Kelsey, at least, intimated retirement and has said he's year to year at this point. You have Brandon Brooks coming off the torn Achilles. So even though you have a lot of good players, you can use whether it's help down the line or depth early. You could use some help there. And the same thing with the defensive line, both at defensive tackle and defensive end, because we're still waiting to see on Chris Long whether he'll be back or not, and I think a lot of that has to do with what happens in the draft. If the Eagles do go defensive end, for instance, in the first round, well, Chris is probably not going to return. If they go defensive tackle, he might not return. So all of those things are to be answered, but those are two positions. Running back is a position. Linebacker without Jordan Hicks, you could use some help there. But you just look at the way the Eagles value positions, and you find it hard to believe. They haven't taken a running back since Keith Byers in the first round. They haven't taken a linebacker in the first round since Jerry Robinson. So I feel pretty good about saying it's going to be offensive or defensive line.
John McMullen. Now, I'm looking at a couple of mock drafts. One, Mel Kiper has a safety, Jonathan Abram from Mississippi State. He says it's time to start thinking about Malcolm Jenkins' replacement. The other, Todd McShay, DeAndre Baker, the corner from Georgia. Would you think safety and corner are likely first-round picks?
I don't think corner is. I think the Eagles are relatively deep there.
I was surprised by
something that. Changes. Yeah, unless something changes between now and then, and there's always trades. People have speculated Duke Johnson is on the trade market, and the Eagles still need more help at running back, and you could sort of project Jordan Howard and Duke as a great complementary pair. and Cleveland has a need at corner, and the Eagles have excess bodies at that position. So something like that were to happen, perhaps that puts it back into the equation. Safety, though, is in that's a position I should have mentioned when I talked about a logical position, because that's another one. You came in with an obvious need, but the Eagles did sign Andrew Sendejo, so they patched it up a bit. But if
they
could
start getting a younger guy there, though.
Yeah, Malcolm is not only aging, but he also plays a lot. I mean, he's out there every single play. So there's a lot of tread off that tire already. You do have to think about it similar to offensive line. You have to think about the heir apparent down the line. And this is a deep team, so it's a good position to be in to say you can take somebody in the first round and don't have to force them on the field immediately. Safety would be another position. Outside receiver, safety, running back, defensive end, defensive tackle, linebacker. These are all potential position the Eagles can look at, but they don't have to. They no longer have a glaring need at any of them, even a linebacker. They brought in L.J. Ford. So they've done a lot of nice things in free agency.
They have. And the one thing with Jenkins I want to ask you about is because I don't want to say that he kind of gets overlooked sometimes, but you're right. He is getting older, and at some point he's going to slow down. When we look back at Jenkins, like, you know, he did play somewhere else before here, but, man, he feels – we were talking yesterday about how, you know, the Mets don't have, like, their forever player. Like, there is no guy who's, like, the Mets guy. Like, Tom Seaver won his 300th game playing for the White Sox. You know, Doc Gooden won a World Series in New York with the Yankees, not the Mets. They just don't have that guy. With the Eagles –
You don't like Jerry Koosman?
Jerry Koosman, I'll pass. Rusty Staub. No,
Ed Kranepool. No,
Ed
I would
Kranepool.
go Tom Seaver.
Yeah. Ed Kranepool might be the guy for the Mets, honestly. Sadly, no. But, you know, Malcolm played somewhere else for a while before he came here. So, I'm like, he's a guy that I'm going to be interested to see, like, how he's kind of looked back on as an Eagle.
Well, I think he's one of the best safeties in this franchise's history. I really do. I think he's in the conversation to be number 2 behind Brian Dawkins. You'd have to go – if you want to go back to Bill Bradley, you want to go back even further for the old-timers. But certainly in the modern era –
Andre Waters, he's above those.
Yeah, I think he's already above those guys. I really do. He's been that effective. He's been that important for this team. Which is a team that obviously won the Super Bowl, made it back to the playoffs. Just his versatility. I don't. Those guys were great, and they run great defenses, and I think the game has changed. So I always say you can only rate people in their particular era, and Malcolm's one of the best safeties in football. He's arguably the most important player on this defense. Fletcher Cox is the best. But I think because of all the things that Malcolm does, remember, he's capable of essentially playing not only strong safety and free safety, but he's played slot corner. He's played essentially dime linebacker as the second linebacker. He's played every position. He's even played outside corner for a few snaps here and there. He's played every position on the back 7 except middle linebacker. That's how versatile he is.
Yeah.
And
so would you say on this defense, him or Fletcher Cox, or I guess you could throw Nigel Bradham as importance?
Yeah, well, they're all important. I mean, Fletcher Cox, I say he's the best pure football player on the Eagles.
Because I hate to say it, John, it seems like it's somebody in that group's turn to miss some significant time. Don't kill the messenger.
Well, you can't legislate injuries. So I never worry about them. There's nothing you can do. I mean, this is if you play this sport long enough, you're going to get hurt. Fletcher got hurt against the Saints, and he had surgery, and he's still recovering with a foot injury. Remember, everybody talked about that fake in that game. That's the play he got injured on. So you can't sort of worry about things like that. and there is a certain amount, and that's why in a lot of ways the NFL is a war of attrition, and health means a lot. And when you do make deep runs, you generally stay healthier. In seasons you don't make deep runs.
Right.
And hey, one of the most impressive things about the Eagles Super Bowl was how many injuries they were able to overcome. But even when you say that, I think last year it was worse because they had injuries at particular positions that piled up. Instead of one here, one there, one over, you can sort of, if you're down a defensive tackle, that's okay. If you're down a corner, that's okay. But if you're down three corners, probably not okay, as you kind of saw last year.
Just to throw their second-round pick, they did a two-rounder here. Kuiper went with Titus Howard, a tackle, which, you got to start looking at offensive line, obviously, because now I'm interested to see what happens when Peters is finally at the end of the road. Do they use Lane Johnson over there, or is Jordan Mailata really the guy? I guess we'll find out more when training camp comes around.
Well, I can only tell you what Jeff Stoutland, really, it was a couple years ago when he decided, you know what, we've constantly been talking about that, and ultimately when Jason Peters does leave, Lane Johnson's going to flip over to the left side. It was 2017.
It's like a coach in waiting. He's the left tackle in waiting.
Yeah, but he said no. He said no. He's no longer thinking about that. He's saying he's so good at right tackle. He doesn't want to move him. And the league has changed. It used to be, even 5 years ago, that's how quickly things move. Everybody's great pass rusher was on the weak side, the right end against the left tackle, typically. Now there's so many good pass rushers on the other side, and the Von Millers of the world, the Khalil Macks of the world, that the right tackle in a lot of ways is just as important as the left tackle. He says he doesn't want to move him. I believe him. I don't think he's going to move him. I think Lane Johnson is the best right tackle in football, and that's where he's going to stay. And a lot of people are going to have the Eagles taking Howard in their mock drafts because they've shown significant interest in him in the pre-draft process, and Stoutland even worked him out at his pro day. So they also had him in for a top 30 visit, so they have a lot of interest in him.
Yeah, he's an interesting story. He was a former quarterback in high school, so he's one of those small school Alabama State. Hey, he played quarterback. He's probably a good athlete, and we'll see. So Titus Howard, by the way,
guess who also was a quarterback in high school? Lane Johnson.
That's right. Todd McShay went with Miles Sander, the running back from Penn State. Now, forget who the player is. Is running back in the second round something you would be more warm to? Because it sounds like first round not happening.
No, I don't think so. The Eagles are going to have Josh Jacobs in this week, actually, on one of their top 30 visits, and that's just due diligence. But he'd be the only guy worthy of going at 25. So there's a couple issues. You don't have a lot of running backs to choose from. There's only one worthy of that selection. And teams that do want a running back kind of know, well, the Eagles have a need at that position as well. So if you want them, you might have to trade up to get them. So I don't know if he'll necessarily make it to 25. I think he'll be in that range. But even if he is there, I don't think the Eagles are going to take him, to be honest, after picking up Jordan Howard. However, I've said pretty consistently I do think they will take a running back in those top 3 picks at some point. And the only thing that would take me off that would be if they do make another trade and acquire a Duke Johnson type, then I would say no. But, yeah, I expect him to pick up a back with receiving skills in the second round. I think that's a very likely possibility.
Yeah, now they have another pick at 57 in which Kuiper has them taking an inside linebacker, Bobby Okereke from Stanford. McShay has him taking a corner. That's 2 corners in the first 2 rounds. And he says, how about another defensive back to restore the depth? Has he looked at their depth chart recently?
Yeah, a lot of us who've covered the Eagles, because there have been a lot of people who have mocked cornerbacks to the Eagles, and we all look at each other and say, okay, they re-signed Ronald Darby, they have Jalen Mills, they have Sidney Jones, they have Rasul Douglas, they have Avonte Maddox, they have Cre'Von LeBlanc. Yeah, the modern NFL, you need a lot of corners, but they're not taking a corner in the first round unless something changes. When you start talking about the second round,
if they did, does that signify trade coming?
Well, it certainly signifies that all those bodies won't be there. So, if you talk about, I know to me it would signify more that the Eagles aren't as high on Sidney Jones as they once were. There's a lot of Rasul Douglas, as I call truthers, out there amongst Eagle fans. The Eagles don't think as highly as Rasul as they do. So it would be an indication to me that they don't think their depth is as good as other people think it is. And I'm not saying that's the case. I think the key to that is Sidney Jones. I think there's concern with Sidney Jones. I think that's fair to say because he had difficulty staying on the field last year. His rookie year is understandable because it's a torn Achilles and he needed time to come back. But last year, when you talk about nagging injuries like hamstrings, that's a concern. And from Rasul's standpoint, he does a lot of nice things. He's got great ball skills, but he's a zone corner. That's all he is. So you do have to scheme around him if he's out there. Can't play a lot of press coverage, things of that nature. So if they do go corner early, it indicates they've soured a little bit on the depth.
John McMullen talking some NFL. A couple NFL news and notes we want to dive into real quick. Yesterday we didn't get to this, but Michael Bennett got a new deal. The new deal that he had been asking for. The Patriots restructured his contract.
Yeah, and that's very similar. You see it happen to veteran players all the time. You saw it with Jason Kelsey here. What happens is once your guaranteed money on those contracts runs out, you see a lot of these restructures. And what happened is essentially he only got about $1 million more than he was scheduled to get over the last 2 years of his contract had it played out here in Philadelphia. But you get signing bonus, you get some of that guaranteed, and that's always something veteran players look for, want, and need. And he was certainly in that category. I still believe more what had to do with Derek Barnett coming back for the Eagles, and Philadelphia had to open up playing time, and they realized that Michael Bennett was not going to be happy if he wasn't getting significant reps. And from his standpoint, from Michael's standpoint, that's kind of understandable because he played really well last season. And he's still playing at a high level.
Yeah. What is this story going on with Russell Wilson? I mean, is he kind of holding the feet to the fire of the Seahawks here, or what?
Yeah,
it always seemed like Wilson loved playing there. That this would always be the marriage, you know.
Well, and I think it will be. I think ultimately, I say it all the time. And it's sort of a dirty little secret in the NFL. You don't need off-season work if you're a veteran player. Now, very, very rarely, especially a veteran player at that level. So missing OTAs, missing phase one conditioning is essentially nothing. But it never happens with quarterbacks because quarterbacks are leaders and they need to be there and they sort of need to set the tone. And need to set the example for the rest of the team. So from that standpoint, it's a little bit more concerning. The Seahawks understand where they are, what he is as a player, and the cost of doing business at that position in this league. It just is what it is. And ultimately, I think the deal will get done, and he will be the highest paid player in the history of football.
For 10 minutes.
The next quarterback, yes, until the next superstar quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, some people are asking, is he trying to force his way to free agency?
No, I don't think so because that's what the NFL system is about. You're not giving up a franchise quarterback, and it's just sort of the normal wrangling. Seattle's smart enough to know. I mean, they've already won a Super Bowl. They were a play away from another Super Bowl. They've been a consistent playoff team virtually throughout his entire run. That's hard to duplicate. They understand what they have. It'll get done.
By the way, earlier today, Mays and Eitan had on tight end from one of the AAF teams. What an unbelievable story that was. He said basically he was sitting in his house, getting ready for a workout, getting ready to go to practice, got a text message from a friend that just said, "Ugh." He knew exactly what that meant. He hit refresh on Twitter. Sure enough, saw Darren Ravel's tweet. He was out of a job. He had to be out of his hotel by 11 o'clock the next morning. See ya.
Yeah, and they should have been. I said all those players that were surprised should have been listening to us because it was no secret it was coming, just a matter of what day, what week. And it's unfortunate. And I do think, to me, the bigger story, once you have the ending and everybody is sort of doing the post-mortem and doing the autopsy, they want to assign blame. And I think Tom Dundon is getting a lot of blame. And I think that's misplaced. I think he certainly could have handled things better. I think certainly with his wealth, he should have given the players plane tickets home. I think that was classless. But remember, if it wasn't for Tom Dundon, the players got $57,000 ended up. If it wasn't for him, they would have played one game. They wouldn't have got paid for it. And they probably would have had to get their own plane ticket home. So if you want to take the glass as half full approach, at least they got $57,000.
Well, just seeing the fact that they've come out and said part of the business model was to always have a relationship with the NFL. You went in then with a business plan that was not guaranteed in the least bit.
No, and that's sort of revisionist history because that was not the original business plan. If you go, I mean, Charlie Ebersol, unfortunately, went on a lot of platforms and never mentioned that originally when he got the financing, which he claimed was much more secure than it obviously was. He claimed it was from different sources, and it was really one guy who didn't have a lot of money, and that's Reggie Fowler. At least he has a lot of money for the average person, but not to run something like that. So there were a number of lies. And then he constantly talked about this sports betting app. And I remember talking about that on this show, Mike, because I said there's the major problem with that, even if it was phenomenal, is that not enough states have that in place to where that could be a monetary difference.
And realistically, who's getting excited about betting an AAF game?
Well, that too. And then the third part, which I also pointed out, is they claim to have this app that nobody else had. And I'm saying to myself, and this is where the cynicism comes in, you're telling me a startup football league that has no money has the ability to put together an app that people in Silicon Valley can't come up with access to billions of dollars? It never made any sense, and it still doesn't make any sense. So the problem is the people leaving the league, they didn't have a clear path. I think it changed, and they kind of, to be honest, they kind of sold Tom Dundon on that thought process that it was going to be a developmental league. And then they shifted into the mode of we need to work out a deal with the NFL and the NFLPA. But as I've said many times, that is not a negotiation that takes hours or days. That takes months or maybe even years.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with a collective bargaining agreement that's already in place. So, hey, that you can place some blame on the plate of Tom Dundon, because if he expected to get a deal done quickly for something like that, he didn't do his due diligence.
at JF McMullen. And you can listen to him every day. Football at 4 right here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Mike.